Welcome. This is the Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing podcast. This is where you'll learn strategies to help you achieve lifetime financial freedom through real estate investment. Your host, Rod Khleif, has owned over 2,000 homes and apartments, and he brings experts in all aspects of real estate investment and management onto the show. Now, here's your host, Rod Khleif.
I want to tell you guys my new website is finally up. It's rodkhleif.com. That's RODKHLEIF.com. And I've got a ton of videos on there that I know you'll enjoy. And if you haven't got my book yet, it's titled How to Create Lifetime Cash Flow Through Multifamily Properties. There's a direct download for the book on my website. You know, at some point, I'm going to be putting it on Amazon and charging for it, but you can get it for free right now via my website. Again, that's rodkhleif.com, KHLEIF.com. All right, let's get to it. Welcome to another edition of How to Build Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing. I'm Rod Khleif, and I'm thrilled you're here. And I know you're going to enjoy the gentleman we're interviewing today. He's a very good friend of mine, actually lives in the area. We've known each other for a number of years and have threatened to do business together for many times, and I know that we will at some point. His name is Anthony Triglia. Anthony is president and CEO of Blue Crush Equity, and he's been involved in portfolios as high as 1,000-plus units and handled tasks in those portfolios like investment selection, due diligence, pro forma modeling. He's very analytical. I may have to dissect some of the things that he says because he speaks at a very high level in this business. Thrilled to have you on the show, Anthony.
Thanks, Rod, for having me, and congratulations on your success with the podcast.
Oh, thank you. So let's talk about you for just a minute and just talk about your evolution in this business and just how you got into it and where you're at right now, if you would.
Sure. Well, I really cut my teeth in the business just on the finance side of things, working in the corporate finance area. And when I really got involved in real estate was a little over, I would say, about 12 years ago now, and I worked for a firm that was doing tenant rep brokerage. So they had really taken on a very large client at the time. They needed an analyst to come in, and that was really my role with them, was looking for space in and around the Philadelphia area and some other target markets, and running analytics for what space, what building really made sense for some of these tenants. So
those of you listening, what he means by that is a lot of all of the really big retailers, or even really retailers, I guess, is probably the biggest sector that tenant reps are used in. And so what'll happen is a big retailer will hire a brokerage firm, or was it a brokerage firm or a management company in your case?
It was a brokerage firm. They really focused on tenant rep.
Right. So they'll hire a brokerage firm to find locations for them, and that's what tenant rep means. So anyway, please continue.
Sure. So I really got a taste for the real estate industry at that position, and something else came along that was a little bit more of my forte as opposed to being on that sales tenant representation side. And I was able to work for a small private equity firm based out of Blue Bell, Pennsylvania. And at that time, they were a smaller shop, but really looking to grow. Back in the early 2000s, we were really able to purchase a number of industrial or single tenant buildings. And that's really where I started to learn the structure of how deals are put together in that private equity space, with the limited partners investing dollars, the general partners either running the deal or running the deal behind the scenes. And my career sort of just grew from them, where I was running deals and running the analytics to being involved in that due diligence or the audit process before you actually close on a deal, and working with the either management company or whatever group was taking over that project for the first 90 days. So my first couple years in the business, I really got a good taste of every step of the way, from finding the deal to underwriting the deal, all the way through ownership, investment, and divestiture.
Well, you were very involved in the management as well. I know in the last several years. So I mean, literally soup to nuts. You find it, you do the due diligence, you close on it. You're involved in the financing, and certainly heavily involved in the analysis. Then you're involved in the management, and ultimately the sale, the divestiture. Yeah, you've worn every hat. So let me. I know you've been heavily involved in syndication as well, and building relationships with prospective investors and we talked before I turned the mics on here, and I think that the thing that I got from our conversation was I know that your investor base keeps growing, and I know you've taken down a couple of large deals this year, 100 units each. This year or in late last year, very impressive. And your comment to me was you keep getting investors, and I think the thing that I wanted to add or embellish on that is, anytime you put a deal together and you make somebody money, they're going to tell all their friends. It only takes, one great deal and making sure that you do what you say you're going to do, and ideally exceed expectations. You always want to under promise and over deliver. They tell their friends, and that's just how it works. It's like word of mouth. I think you used that expression that you're getting a lot of your investors from word of mouth. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. Yeah. It's interesting how a number of our investors and the great thing about our group, about our small network of partners is, our investors are a little bit older. They have more patient money. And what we've been doing is we'll bring one person in or two people in, new investors. They get their feet wet. And then, like you said, Rod, next deal, they actually bring 4 or 5 people with them.
Right.
So as opposed to us having to really branch out and speak to the masses, we talk to a few key folks who speak to their 5 or 10 folks, and that's
works.
How we've started.
That works. Yeah, that's how you get scale. I mean, a lot of people will, like you mentioned earlier, they'll go on LinkedIn. We said that offline as well, and try to, they'll be out there marketing. And of course, you have to have the right Reg D offering when you do that, the latest one where you're allowed to market to accredited investors. And we're not going to turn this into a syndication interview today, but I will tell you, just to hammer that home, when you take care of a few key people, when you're interviewing investors, it's very, very important to find out what they want, what their needs are, and what their hopes are, and what their dreams are, because you want to make sure whatever you're offering ties into what they're looking for. But once you make them money, it just mushrooms from there. So, guys, those of you thinking about syndicating, do that first deal, under promise and over deliver, and you're off to the races. Would you agree, Anthony?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What I thought we'd do this episode is, you could talk about any piece of this, from property management to how to acquire the financing and what's involved and all that. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to hone in on due diligence, because I know you just closed on a deal. You've closed on 2 big ones here in the last literally 3 to 4 months. So let's talk about the due diligence process and what's involved, so my listeners know. This is going to be on a big property. And this level of due diligence may or may not be required depending upon the size. But I know these were both like 100-plus units. So let's talk about what you went through to make sure these were viable deals. So let's get into it. So where do you start?
Where you really start is compiling about a box worth of documentation that you have to go through. And that can be pulling leases, making sure that those are correct, looking at previous financials for the last 2 or 3 years. You're pulling all of your utility bills for the past couple years, looking at market surveys, looking at your tax documentation. Basically any operational document that you can get your hands on is really kind of where we start, just compiling all of that information. I'll get into that a little bit into more detail in a few minutes, but
great.
The other thing that is of the utmost importance to us is when we start to do our unit walks, and where it helps when you're buying a community that has quite a few units is to have a bunch of folks there walking those units with you. You might be able to do 100 units or maybe 200 units in a day, depending on how large you have, how large your team is. But
sure, and just so you know, I know that you had your property management company helping with you with this, and you guys now outsource your property management. And I think, if I recall, in one of yours, the property management was instrumental in getting you the deal or finding you the deal. But like Anthony said, you don't go through a property and just look at a handful of units. You look at every single unit. Somebody goes in there and they look at the ceiling, the walls, the plumbing, the everything in every single unit, correct?
That's correct. You're grading the carpeting, you're grading all the appliances, and if you're buying with debt, your lender may not require that you walk through every single unit, but when they go out there, the lender's going to go out there, your third-party guys are going to go out there to look. They're basically, what we've learned in the last deal or two is, as opposed to us picking and choosing 10 units that they walk through, they want to have the entire property available. They can pick and choose whichever one they want, but typically they'll go at least one unit in every building, right, and one different floor plan. So you really have to be ready to have the entire property walked to be in compliance with your lender. But for your benefit, a lot of the deals that are out there right now, or excuse me, I should say some of the deals that are out there now are either fully refurbed or partially refurbed, and you want to make sure that that's an accurate statement.
Right, because the owner could tell you that they're all refurbished, or a big number of them are, and if you don't go check for yourself, boom. It's on you. It is critical to look at every unit, and you just can't rely on anything anyone tells you, from the maintenance staff to the ownership. And I just want to hammer that point home.
Well, we all have different definitions of what we consider grade A, grade B, needs to be replaced, can be worked on. So it's important to do those unit walks just so at least you get your assessment of how those units look. Right. We've more often than not, you walk through and somebody tells you that this unit was just refurbed. It was a complete refurb done, and you walk through and it's not the same definition that you would give it. But
right. Well, you're being very kind, but you're absolutely right. It is subjective. I want to go back to something for a second, and because I want to go. I do want to revisit the on-site visit, but back to the things that you asked for, and it's a big list. So I want to go back to the items that you're going to need to get from a seller, and I've got a list here, and I'm just going to go through them. Those of you listening, if you're in the midst of a due diligence project, come back and revisit this because you're going to want to get operating statements year to date and past 2 to 3 years. Ideally, bank statements if you can get them to verify deposits. The utility deposit register, utility bills, tax bills. Even tax returns if you can get them specific to the property. Definitely a rent roll, a security deposit register. If there's on-site staff, you're going to want payroll records. Certainly you're going to want ultimately you're going to want copies of every lease, but at the very least, initially, you're going to want examples of every type of lease so you can see if there's anything funny in those. You're going to need to know any policies or procedures for pets and parking. And if the building is offering rent concessions or has in the past, you're going to want to know that. And you're going to want copies of any contracts with any vendors, any of the vendors, the pool company, the trash company, the laundry. You're going to want information about their maintenance. Their maintenance structure, how do they do maintenance requests? Is there a big stack of uncompleted maintenance that's in somebody's desk drawer? That's not uncommon when a property turns over. You're going to want a list of any capital improvements that have been done to the property. You're going to want to know if there's been any litigation in the past, who sued who. Copy their insurance, of course. And if there have been any claims, so there's a lot of things. If they've got any surveys or architectural plans or past environmental reports or any reports from the past that it can possibly help you. And so there's a lot of things you're going to ask for. A big list. Copy their business license. If they've got any operational manuals that can help you in the management of property, that's helpful. What am I forgetting here, Anthony? Anything jump out at you?
No, you're doing a great job of going through the list. The one thing that I would say that at least I've started to focus on heavily at the beginning of due diligence is really understanding the litigation process. Operating in as many states as we do the East Coast, it's amazing how if you're owning or managing, I would call it a more challenging project where collections is a larger portion of what you do on a monthly basis than some others. It's amazing to see how that litigation process, how long it takes.
Now, what he's talking about here, guys, if you have to evict, okay? So you really need to know what the eviction process is. When he says litigation, we're okay, correct? I mean, I'm paraphrasing for you, Anthony. Is that correct? You're talking about how to get a resident out if you have to.
Exactly. And, okay. The point of all of that is in different states, depending on how strict they are, if they're considered more landlord or tenant friendly, it's amazing to see how the payment or collection habits will change. We operate in some states where they don't even actually go to, there's not even really a court date. It's considered a NISI hearing. And you basically stand in front of the judge and they say, do you owe the money? Yes. Do you live there? Yes. And you get a decision in 14 days. We have other areas where it might take 6 months to get somebody moved out. And there's lots of other subtle nuances inside cities or counties that are different. And you can really see a large difference in collection habits based on, that litigation process. So that's continued to move further and further up on the
list of important
level of
things,
importance on that checklist. Because if you end up in a place where, and it's true, there are places out there that if you know the process, you could live almost for a year for free.
Oh yeah, there are professional tenants that will make your life hell if you don't know what you're doing. So you need to make sure you do that as part of your due diligence in whatever market you're in. I will tell you my horror story from Memphis, and sorry guys that live in Memphis, but I don't think it's this way anymore because the bankruptcy law has changed. But back in the day when I owned 200 houses there, if you filed an eviction, the resident would get letters from several attorneys that would say, we can stop your eviction by filing a wage earner, they called it. But a wage earner was a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Now, I'm pretty sure they can no longer do that. But, I mean, literally, we had tenants that took us a year to get them out. Now, I don't want to scare you guys listening because that's unusual, but it is important for you to know. And I don't recommend you ever do your own eviction. Well, in some cases you can't, particularly if the property is owned in an LLC. Well, actually, that's not true. If you're one of the owners of the LLC, you usually can. But you don't want to. Because if you make one simple little mistake on the paperwork, the judge is going to throw it out and you start all over again. And that could reset the clock another month and a half. So very, very important that you get help and you study this as part of your due diligence process so that you don't make any of those mistakes, because you'll only make them once. I will tell you that. But if you're locked into a property in a tenant-friendly environment. And I'm not being diplomatic here, but that's just the fact of the matter. If it's a very tenant-based, legal environment, you can really get hammered. I mean, it's no fun, and you can regret your purchase if you've got a C- or D class property where you have a lot of turnover. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Anthony. Or
you are 100% correct. One of the things that I do. And might be beneficial to some of your listeners that are looking at buying projects out there. Other than your time, it doesn't cost any money. But where we own and operate, they typically do those unlawful detainer filings on one specific day during the month or during the week.
And that's an eviction. That's a fancy name for an eviction. Okay.
So go to the courthouse, sit there for a few hours, and listen. And just really listen to the conversations between the attorneys and with the judge. Listen to what type of judgments are given, how many filings are there. Are they sitting there for 3 hours and there's a whole bunch of other projects that are going through the same type of litigation. I mean, so you can really learn a lot by going to the courthouse one day and just listening to the same type of filings that you're going to be involved in once you close on the property. And you'll really learn a lot about how tenants are talking, what the lawyers are saying, and maybe you'll find some pitfalls in your own leases that
very good point.
Resident or lawyer might use against you.
Very good point. You know, me, I'm lazy. I would probably find the local, well-known eviction attorney and just pick their brain as a prospective new client. But I love your idea to see actually in the courthouse if there's a judge that's taking apart a lease, for example. Sometimes you can have a clause in your lease and they'll throw the whole lease out. So that's a very, very interesting point. Back to due diligence. Now let's talk about when you're on site and you're looking at the property. You're going to walk every unit. Of course, before this happens, you're going to have known if every how the utilities are metered, or are all the units separately metered. You're going to want to see where the main water shutoff is. Make sure that you find that out from the present owner, so that if you have a big leak, you can go right to it and your staff can go right to it. Where the main electrical panel is and where the sub panels are. I would guess that you bring in mechanical contractors and plumbers and electricians, and I assume that you do that on all your acquisitions, Anthony, and have them, have all the systems checked out. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes, typically we do have a handful of folks there. We usually bring in a general contractor to look at, if we're specifically speaking about Florida, one of the main things I want them to look at is the roof. Okay. So we'll bring in somebody that gets up on the roof, looks at the paneling like you're talking about, looks at the structural integrity of the buildings, especially if it's not concrete block all the way up, if it's built with any type of wood frame construction. So when we do our first unit walks, there's, believe it or not, there's a team that does all the interior walks. We have a contractor team that looks at everything up and down structurally. And then we have a documentation, either person or team, that's sitting there
looking at all the leases and all the papers, right?
You got it. So it's and one thing I will put out there for some of the folks that are looking to buy some larger projects. One thing that a number of property management companies are doing now, or it seems that they're doing now to gain that business, is they are offering to help with that due diligence process. Because what we've noticed over the past few years is that time frame that you're allowed to look at the property is getting shorter and shorter.
Right.
And if you're a small group like we are, there's only so much you can do in that time frame. Well, these management companies have gotten smarter and said, we'll step in, we'll help with that due diligence, and they'll do it for a fee. Or if you retain them as the management company after the fact, there may be even a discount to that due diligence fee. And not only is that a financial benefit, but put it in this perspective. You basically have a property management company that for 30, 60, 90 days has been learning about the project. So day one, when they take over,
they're up and
they
running
know as much as you do about the project. Yeah. So it's a very valuable option that we have. Now you'd have to really look at projects that are a little bit larger, right, or that can afford a property management company. But that's very helpful to have 6 or 7 people there to do one on-site inspection, which is nice for your residents and for your seller too, because you know how residents work. You go in there and they want to know who you are and what you're doing and what's going on, and people start to talk. So to be able to do it in 1 day or 2 days helps the seller and is a much better for the residents.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. You're basically on a fact-finding mission when you're going through this, and you're looking for problems. I mean, you're looking for cracks in the foundation. You're looking for infestations, possible settlement issues. Like you say, you have a contractor there that has an experienced eye. I always look for negative drainage. One of the biggest things that I've encountered in my career is when you've got a drain pipe from a roof that's running into a foundation, it doesn't have the the curb that takes the water away from the building, or if the dirt around the building is at a grade into the building, that's when you have problems, settlement issues and real significant problems. And So things like that, somebody that's got an eye that can look for that. But not to say you can't do all this yourself, because you can. And now let's talk about, let's back up now. We jumped right into the inspection, but let's back into what's your market overview. When you're looking at a market and doing you had a deal come across your desk, it's in a market you're not familiar with. What are you going to go look at, Anthony, to see if that deal makes sense?
Well, I mean, like you said, you go really on a fact-finding mission.
Right.
But what we typically do is we will shop what we believe is the competition in the area.
Right.
What we're really looking for is if we can get an occupancy rate out of somebody, or we go and walk their units and see what they're marketing at what price. And, sort of what will turn us on to one area or not is it's considered, maybe a growing area, but our rents are far lower than competition, but our assets are either better, or we have better amenities, or we feel like we could manage the projects better than the ones that are around there. So some of the recent projects that we've taken down have really have checked a lot of those boxes. They were cared for extremely well by the previous owner. There's long-term tenancy there, but the rents might be extremely low in comparison to the competitive market. So that's what will basically pass the initial sniff test before we go into the analytics and going through all the documentation.
Sure, but when you're looking at in an area, I would guess that you're looking at population growth, you're looking at income growth. You don't want declining population, declining income. I would guess you're looking at that. You're looking at the major employers, making sure you're not buying in a one-horse town where if that employer leaves, you're going to get decimated. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming you're checking an area out.
Absolutely, and okay. There's we also look for other ancillary sources of tenancy, whether it's there's a university that's nearby,
right?
Whether it's near a military base, is there tourist attractions there? Like if you're in and around the Orlando area, and you have Disney and all the theme parks that are there. If you're in closer to the beach, where you can get that pull. So as opposed to just looking for your working public, there's other opportunities there.
Yeah, for residents.
So we like those markets as well.
Sure. If you've got big employers, that's great. Now, I assume you also check the crime around that area. I know we use spotcrime.com. To make sure that you're not in a pocket of crime that you're unaware of just by driving by.
Sure, we always check out. We always pull the crime reports for at least the past year, as much as we can get from the sheriff's office.
Sure.
But the interesting thing, and you touch on the crime side of it, but not to keep going back to the unit walk side of things, but you learn so much in that time frame. And one thing is you'll always get a lot of good input from your residents. And like anything else, you take it from a grain of salt. But if you're doing unit walks in a day and you walk 25 houses, you'll talk to a lot of residents that'll tell you this person was kicked out for one reason. Right. Ownership is either very responsive or not responsive for repair and maintenance, or they've come back several times. So, in talking to your residents, you really learn a lot about the operational side of things, aside from what you can read or what the ownership is telling you. So it's extremely valuable to be there, which is why we as an ownership entity want to be there on that day to hear a lot of those stories and what the residents are saying.
No question. I mean, you can just flat out ask them, are you staying? What and why? Or are you thinking about leaving and why? Those are very insightful answers that you're going to get from that, and that'll help you in being the best possible owner of that asset. Some of the things we do is we look for, how close the nearest grocery store is, is there public transportation? Is there things you can do around there? Can you walk around there? Or is it, is it surrounded by industrial, or is it surrounded by residential, things of that nature? And you can do all that from Google Earth. You can look down on a property and see what's around it. And I'll put it in the show notes, guys, but there's a website you can go to and check a walkability rating. Do you know what it is, Anthony?
No, actually, I don't. Okay. I wish I did, so I'll be checking those notes.
All right. So you're looking at for below market rents, because guys, you're listening. Those of you listening, anytime you can improve the NOI, the net operating income, it's an exponential increase in the value of the property. So obviously, it's just like any other real estate asset that you buy. You want to be able to increase the rents and ideally decrease the expenses. And there you go. Are there any red flags you look for when you're looking through the numbers? Because you're very analytical, and I know that you're an expert at that. So tell me what you're looking for when you're looking through the income and expense statements. If there's a system you go through.
There's not really a system,
Okay.
but I do say there are a number of things that I do look at.
Okay.
I take a look at how many late charges as a percentage of the total rent collected on a monthly basis. I always want to take a look at the aged receivables report at different points of the month to see how long collections are taking.
Just for those of you listening, what he's doing there is he's just seeing if a lot of people are paying late. Okay, keep going, buddy.
So the other side that we look at is how much are they spending on legal bills every month, which sort of can give you an idea of how many folks that they're taking to court every single month. On the revenue side of things, if their books are on an accrual basis, you're looking at how much concessions are being given on a monthly basis. That sort of tells you a little bit about what it's taking management to fill those units.
Do you look when you're looking at the expenses? I assume you're looking for anomalies, like a big month, and then you want to know why. Sure,
you're always looking at the numbers for anything that changes. We typically look at anything that changes from 3 to 5% from month to month. A material change. If you have something that changed from $150 to $200, you may not look at that. But things that change several $1,000s, you always will ask the current ownership about what happened there.
Sure.
But there's statistics that are out there, national and regionalized statistics of how much your advertising should be based on a per unit basis, your payroll. So not only are you looking for inconsistencies from month to month, but you're looking for inconsistency based on one of the luxuries that we have as an organization is we own and operate a number of properties. So when you buy 100 units, we really know
what
generally
it should cost.
How much it should cost. So anything that goes above or even below that, we
if it's below that, they could be leaving stuff off the P&L. They could be hiding expenses, paying cash for things, or if it's above that, it could be an opportunity. Sometimes these owners will have managers that have been with them for a decade, and they're paying them way too much. No, that's great, and you're saying that information's online. I did not realize that. So there are some statistics about what that stuff should cost.
Well, if you it costs a bit of money, but one of the organizations that's extremely valuable for apartment folks is the National Apartment Association, and there's local chapters that give you a membership to the national organization, and they publish statistics, and there's a very large book that comes out that's regionalized every year that gives you statistics on thousands and thousands of units. That's extremely helpful.
No, that's awesome. That's a great tip. We'll put that in the notes as well if you guys missed that. Now, one of the other things we do if we're buying in an area that we're unfamiliar with, and just you tell me if this makes sense to you, Anthony, is we'll call the Chamber of Commerce and find out what's going on. Are there businesses coming in or businesses leaving? We'll call the local police department and find out what's happened with that property. Are there any problems around that area or that property? We'll call the economic development office and see if there's any incentives for investing there, number one. And then they'll also know, some of this, they may know more than the chamber does about what's coming in. And of course, we call the assessor's office and ask their opinion on the property, maybe the zoning department. And then we'll even call some brokers, get their opinions.
You're right on it. When we talk, you say some local brokers, but yeah, it's interesting how much information you can get driving around, looking at real estate signs, seeing if you see some common names and calling them up and asking them. And one of the reasons we do that, and this is something that's also important in the due diligence process, nowadays there are large, very successful groups out there that own a lot of single family homes that they're renting. And for the folks that are having larger apartments, maybe it's, I don't want to throw a number out there, but I would say a large 2-bedroom or a large 3-bedroom, you start to, depending on where you're priced.
Oh, you're competing.
You're competing with these single tenant rentals. So it's extremely important for us to at least find out what that threshold is where you're truly competing with a single tenant.
Right. Particularly in a A or B property, you're definitely competing, and it's important. That's a very good point. A lot of these big hedge funds, BlackRock and Fortress, or I may have the names wrong, but they bought thousands of houses. No, you're absolutely right. And maybe it'd be great to get that information. And we even take it one step further. We'll throw an ad in Craigslist to kind of test demand and market the unit mix that we have, and just see if the phone rings. And that can be interesting to see what happens if you don't get any phone calls, for example. Well, listen, we have really talked about due diligence let me just look and see. Yeah, analyzing the competition, of course. I'm looking at my own checklist here. And we look for additional income opportunities as well. Maybe I know in one of your properties you were talking about a clubhouse that you could convert to more units. So you're always looking for that as well, correct? Ways to drive more income, maybe paying for the covered parking, or can you give me some examples of ways to drive additional revenue, Anthony?
Sure. If you have other space available, I mean, it's driving other revenue versus justifying increases, whether you add other amenities. We're constantly looking for that. If we have other land available and they don't have a dog park or amenities like that, we would add. If we have a clubhouse that we can convert, or we're near a student population, maybe that gets turned into amenities for them. And it may not be direct revenue that's being paid like you would if you turned it into storage or if you converted it into other units. But if you're attracting a higher paying demographic, then indirectly it is going to increase your revenue. So we are always looking for those opportunities at every one of our projects.
Fantastic. Anthony, thank you so much for your valuable time. I will probably have you on the show again. We'll pick another topic. I think we just knocked it out of the park on the due diligence conversation. Thank you so much, buddy. I appreciate you being on.
Rod, I really do appreciate the opportunity. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe and then take a moment to visit iTunes and leave a 5-star rating and review. For more resources to connect with us further, please visit our website at lifetimecashflowpodcast.com. Tune in next week for our next show.